Well, thanks, Melanie, and thanks really to the willingness of Columbus College of Art and Design to be our venue host and partner inside this magnificent Kenzani Auditorium. Gramercy Books is so very thrilled to feature award-winning and best-selling crime writer Michael Connelly and his 39th novel, The Waiting, just released Tuesday. And we're equally excited and grateful to have Michael in conversation with Central Ohio's esteemed longtime journalist, Ann Fisher. I want to recognize Buckeye crime writers for joining with Columbus College of Art and Design and Gramercy Books to present tonight's program. And along with CCAD President Melanie Korn, also wanted special thanks for help with all the logistics, Rochelle Simonson. Let me just preview the next hour very quickly. After my introductions, Michael and Ann will discuss The Waiting for about 40 minutes. We have about 15 minutes or so for your questions. You've submitted them in advance. We have some great questions, so we will have time for those. And then finally, Michael will sign your copies of The Waiting following the program in the lobby. So just so you know, Gramercy Books continues to offer weekly author events for the community to enjoy. You can find our full author programming on our website at gramercybooksbexley.com, where we have information about author programs scheduled into early 2025. Next month, on November 12th, we're going to host National Jewish Book Award winner Ronald Balson, and on November 24th, we're going to host U.S. House of Representatives Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. So we're very excited about both of these and more events up into 2025. So you can find out all about them if you sign up for our e-newsletter, or you can just visit our website. And now on to tonight's program. In The Waiting, LAPD Detective Renee Ballard tracks a serial rapist whose trail has gone cold and enlists a new volunteer to the open unsolved unit, Patrol Officer Maddie Bosch, Harry Bosch's daughter. This is Michael's sixth novel featuring Ballard, providing a lens into her backstory and a nuanced portrayal of this gritty detective. Complex, satisfying, and full of surprising twists. I get being a bookseller, I get to read these books in advance. The Waiting displays all of Michael Connelly's storytelling mastery. Michael Connelly is the author of 38 previous novels, including New York Times bestsellers Resurrection Walk, Desert Star, and The Law of Innocence. His books, which include the Harry Bosch series, the Lincoln Lawyer series, and the Renee Ballard series, have sold more than 85 million copies worldwide. That's 85 million copies. Michael's a former newspaper reporter who's won numerous awards for his journalism and his novels. He's the executive producer of 3 television series, Bosch, Bosch Legacy, and The Lincoln Lawyer, and he spends his time in California and Florida. And in conversation with Michael is Ann Fisher, the former host and executive producer of All Sides with Ann Fisher. She retired last year from WOSU, but has continued doing her Hallmark interviews. Prior to joining WOSU Public Media in 2009, Ann spent nearly 30 years in the newspaper business, covering politics, public affairs, culture, media, and business over the course of her career at the Grand Rapids Press, The Blade in Toledo, and the Columbus Dispatch. A native of Michigan, Ann earned a BS in journalism at Michigan State University, and she lives in Worthington with her husband, Jeff Martin. So, let's now welcome to the stage Michael Connelly and Ann Fisher.
Thank you very much. Welcome tonight. It's great to be here. I'm operating in the old-fashioned way because my printer didn't work. So listen, Michael Connelly, I wanted to be a journalist when I grew up. That's all I wanted to do. You wanted to be a police reporter so you could be a crime novelist when you grew up. And you said, when we were behind back in the other room, I said something like your ulterior motive, which wasn't pejorative, and I didn't mean it that way at all. But you were a young man with a mission. How did that come about? Why that route? Why not become a cop?
Good question. I didn't think I could function in that kind of, the cops are kind of paramilitary organizations, and at least back then, to a lesser degree now, you had to spend a lot of years in uniform before they would consider you a detective, and that's what I was interested in, detectives. And so I just didn't think I had the right personality, so I didn't think I would function good as a cop, but I enjoyed reading about them and so forth. When I was 16, I was a witness to a crime, and I spent a night in a police station with a kind of really tough guy detective, and something about him really impressed me, and that's one of the key things that happened in my life that made me go down the path to being a writer. But my consideration of, do I actually want to solve murders or write about people who solve murders? That question was kind of asked and answered very quickly. I just didn't think I had it in me to do that.
So as a writer, as a journalist, you weren't solving anything, you were covering.
Yeah, it was like watching the detectives, yeah. And and when I came, I was like about 19 when I thought, I want to try to do this someday, write novels, crime novels specifically. So when I went home and told my parents from college, I went home and said, I want to change my major. I don't know what I'm going to change it to, but I want to be a writer. And I was in an engineering school. And it was actually my father. It probably helped that I was flunking my classes. But it was my father who basically, I don't know where he had the wherewithal to suggest this, but he said, don't go back and be an English lit major. If you really want to write crime novels, not novels, very specifically, then go back and get a journalism degree and get a press pass and get into police stations and get up to the yellow tape at crime scenes. And what you're saying you want to do is a long shot. You got to acknowledge that. And so this could be a very interesting job if you don't get that shot, or you take the shot and it doesn't work out. But it could also get you in a good position to take that shot. So it was amazing advice from a guy who was pretty much uneducated, So, but he had the idea, and I did it, and I spent 14 years as a journalist, as a card-carrying journalist. I feel I still do journalism in my books, but I worked for newspapers for 14 years, and 12 of them were on the crime beat.
Was it hard to get on the crime beat? Because I remember if you did cop, you always started out in the overnight shift. I
did lots of night cops, as they call it.
Yeah.
It wasn't hard because, and I don't know what it's like now, and the newspaper business, as we both know, it's quite a different business now. But it was kind of like a reporter's job, and you did it for a couple of years, you got burned out or whatever, and then or if you showed you were good, you moved on, they moved you to something else. But I had that ulterior motive, so I always deflected any efforts to get me off the beat, and I always stayed, and the most I would do would allow them, or without protest. I mean, it's not like you get to pick your path. But,
exactly.
But I was good at it, so they were happy to let me stay on it. Every now and then, in 2 different jobs at 2 different papers, they sensed that I was burning out on it, and so they put me on the court beat. So it was like I was covering the crimes I wrote about when they happened. So.
Because that's how fast justice operates in this country, right? You do an incredible job. For anybody who's like a political junkie like me or anything like that, you weave the crimes, the violence, the death, the larceny, the whatever is all wrapped up in the crime itself, and then there's the discovery, and then there's the politics. And you have a particular word for when it's department politics, when it's police politics.
Oh yeah, I mean, in the LAPD, where Harry Bosch functioned for a long time, they call it high jingo.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's, in some ways, finding the killer is kind of window dressing on something else. a slice of society, a character story. I love, like I said, I still feel like I'm a journalist. I spend time and I ask questions with people who do the jobs that like defense attorneys or homicide detectives. And I love it when they tell me about the obstacles placed in front of them that have nothing to do with who did it. It's about bureaucracy and it's about politics and it's about gender a lot and things like that. And that to me, I was saying this, I used to do this a lot, and then cops started coming to my book signings, but I used to say, raise your hand if you ever solved a murder, and there'll be no hands raised. So why are we reading these books, and why am I writing them? You try to, it's a very strange world that we want to know about, but you really got to connect the people who don't know anything about it on a basic empathic and human level. So we've all dealt with politics and we've all dealt with bureaucracy. So I know that's like the strike zone in these books, that the way Harry Bosch deals with an idiot boss or a politics or something. I always get the sense that the readers are like, almost subconsciously nodding their head, like, I know what that's like. I don't know how to solve a murder, but I know what Harry is going through, and that's the connecting point.
What about that fascination? I mean, it's obviously a huge, huge thing, this fascination with crime.
We could talk about just that one question, but I think it is an alien world for most of us, and it's a serious world. It's one that we all think about, like, are we in danger, or are we safe, that kind of thing. But also, especially in crime fiction, you're dealing with people who are in high stakes situations, and usually in books they have to make a choice. They have to step up and do something, or they don't. And I think we all want to know, would we step up when the chips were down and when something important is happening and there might be danger or you might have to sacrifice something, would we step up or not? And I think these books, help us make those kind of choices, or kind of tell us how we will act.
Well, like Harry going through the catacombs in Echo Park, or what? Is that what you mean?
Well, I mean, metaphorically.
There was something interesting I read. Someone asked you something about Hieronymus Bosch and the name, the painter, the background of that, and does it mean anything to you? And you said in response something like, everything has meaning. These are character studies, and and critics and so forth can dismiss this as popular commercial fiction, but it's a character story. You're connecting a character. No one reads my books for the plots. I think they read it because they want to ride with Harry Bosch through a story, or Renee Ballard, or Mickey Hall, or whatever. So it's always a character thing, and so therefore you never miss a chance to say something about character. So why call your character John Smith if you can call him Hieronymus Bosch? Yeah. Because, and I apologize if there's anyone named John Smith, but it's like, also, you remember, I've been around a long time, so when I published the first Harry Bosch book, there was no internet. You couldn't type in Hieronymus Bosch and figure out who that was. So it was very much more obscure when I did it in the first place. But just by happenstance, when I was in college, I took a humanities class, and the professor was fixated on Hieronymus Bosch, so we spent a long time, studying these crazy paintings and their possible meanings. And I just thought that would be perfect when I was writing about this detective. The painter's most famous work is called The Garden of Earthly Delights, and it's, it goes from Adam and Eve to like all this dark stuff happening. And I always thought that Los Angeles, I'd been covering crime in Los Angeles, so I was kind of like dwelling in the dark side of the city. And I just thought there was a correlation there. And initially my idea would be that this detective I'm calling Hieronymus Bosch would be able to look at a crime scene like a painting and figure out what happened. That's not what ended up happening with the books. It was more of a active investigation type guy. But that was the initial thinking, and I knew there's going to be some people out here who know who Hieronymus Bosch is, and they'll get it.
and there's going to be probably the majority would not know who he is, and that's a win too, because that would be intriguing. Like, how do you get this name, you know, and what does that name mean? And so it was just something that you know, when I wrote first draft of what was my first Bosch book, his name was Pierce, and no first name, just Detective Pierce, and that came from an essay that Raymond Chandler wrote about the detective in fiction, and he kept using the word pierce. He has to pierce all veils of society. He has to be able to go wherever the case takes him. And you know, I'm pretty much a disciple of Raymond Chandler, so I called the guy Pierce, and then and I can't remember why, but at some point I was reminded of that humanities class about 15 years earlier, and I thought that would be a more intriguing title. And it's funny, little by little, my career took off, and I did some book touring in Europe. And when I went to Holland, Hieronymus Bosch, the painter, was from that area. All the journalists who interviewed me said, "Why'd you call him Harry for short?" And I was informed that Hieronymus is the Latin root of the word Jerome, so they suggested he should be Jerry Bosch. And it doesn't have the same ring to it, you know. Apologize to anyone named Jerry.
Or Jerome. You know, it's funny when you describe that original approach you were thinking about taking as kind of seeing each crime as a painting to be discerned. I was thinking about that with Mickey Haller, and I'm trying to think of which book it was, but the way he was describing how it felt like he wanted to conduct an orchestra or something during a trial, that there was the jury, and then there's there's all these different characters that he has to direct and has to make them come through in a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he's inspired by real defense attorneys, and that's one of the big things I get from them, that if you get to a trial, it's performance. It's all about performance, and it's a stage, it's a box, you have an audience, and they really care about that and plan things and know how they're doing, and I find that, know what they're going to do, and I really find that fascinating part about it. And you know, I watched a lot of trials when I burned out on the cop beat and they put me over on the court beat. So I'm not a lawyer, but I spent a lot of time. I may have spent more time in courtrooms than most lawyers, because they mostly want to avoid trials, right. You know, because it's such a risky thing to go to trial. But so I feel real comfortable about that. But you know, those are more complex books. They're the hardest books I write are about Mickey Haller, and just because. If you get stuff wrong, you're going to hear from lawyers. You know. Yeah.
Well, you know, I wanted to ask you, who are your favorite, or who do you think are your biggest fans? Cops, lawyers, criminals?
I have had a few criminals say one guy came to a book signing I did in New Jersey a couple nights ago and told the whole story that I helped him do his bid, as he called it, in prison. Reading my books, so yeah, I mean, it's good. You know, I don't write them for lawyers. I don't write them for cops. You know, I actually write for myself. I think if it's something I like, there'll be people out there who will like it. But it is when a cop comes up and says, you know, you really are very close to getting it right, or you know, it's pretty accurate. That's good. But you know, I've also learned that the law is subjective, and so I've had lawyers come up and say, that would never work, and it's based meticulously on something that did work, you know, that I got from a real lawyer. So I just have to nod my head and say, yeah, you're probably right.
Do you, I mean, it's fiction, but is it utterly fiction, or are the stories usually based on something that you've read about, or?
Yeah, I mean, it comes from all over. I do spend as much time as I can with the people who do the work that I write about. And more often than not, the inspiration point is someone telling me a story. Detectives will tell me a story, and the timbre of their voice, because they've gotten emotionally involved, that somehow really gets to me. And so a lot of my stories are based on real things, but they're not the stuff you read about, and they're not big cases. They're not like O.J. Simpson or something like that. I mean, this book, The Waiting, there's multiple cases in this book, but there's one string is Renee Ballard and the cold case team are running down a serial rapist that kind of disappeared after attacking several women 20 years before. And that's inspired when I grew up in South Florida and I first worked in newspapers there. And I wrote about this guy called the pillowcase rapist who committed dozens of attacks and then disappeared. And it was almost hysteria. They were very close together. He was like hitting every week, and it was like, where is he gonna hit next? People are buying guns. People are shooting at skunks and stuff when they hear noises. And so it was a really scary time, and then it was over. And then like almost 40 years go by, and I've left Fort Lauderdale. I've left Florida. I'm not even a journalist anymore. And I read in the New York Times that case was suddenly solved 40 years later because a young man had been arrested in a felony domestic violence case which required a DNA swab. And so when that ran through, it came back and said, this guy's father is the pillowcase rapist. So they caught him. And so that's pretty quick solving after a 40-year hiatus. So of course in my book I have to really complicate it, but that's inspired by it's inspired by a true story, and it's inspired by a story that I had a part in.
I'm thinking about you talking to a detective about something like this and thinking what a privilege it is, because as a journalist, I know they're not particularly forthcoming. They don't want to talk about what they do, and it's got to be invaluable. I mean, lawyers, on the other hand, blah, 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 but I hope I didn't offend any lawyers.
Apology to all lawyers. I'm doing a lot of apologizing.
But
yeah, I mean, but I have found, I have two answers to that. One is you're absolutely right, and so my early career, I wrote 4 books when I was still a working journalist, and I probably could have left after 2, but I had that card that got me in, and I could sit in front of a detective and ask them questions. And it was usually about a story, but I was always picking up stuff that, metaphorically I would put in my back pocket, and I'd say, this is good for a book. It has no business being in a newspaper story, but it was research. And so I stayed longer than I really needed to, like in terms of financial and so forth, because I wanted that access. And then I didn't realize this, that as soon as I reached the point where I said, I got to try to be the best novelist I can be, or to be the best journalist I could be, and I chose novelist, so I quit. And then suddenly my access was way open. I got more access because I was no longer a threat.
you were quoting them or
Yeah. I mean, they, so people were revealing more things to me, and what it was is they respond to sincerity. I mean, whatever you do in life, people don't understand what you do, and they have a very complicated job. They have what I call a noble bargain that, if they do it right, it probably won't be noticed, but if they do it wrong, there's people like you and me ready to write about it and splash it in the newspapers. And so that's why even though I procured sources and had close sources that helped me in my job, they always knew that someday I might knock on their door and be writing a negative story about them. So once that threat was gone, it was all about people's understanding that I sincerely want to get this right. And I'm not talking about procedure and forensics. I'm talking about what it takes to do that job, to kind of, as a matter of course, go into the darkness in our world and try to prevent some of that darkness from getting in you. That's a tough thing to do, and that's at the core of what I'm trying to do with people like Harry and Renee.
some of the blurbs, I was going through them, and this sort of like evil genius blurbs, like another evil genius, from Michael Connelly. They get into these kind of really dark references to your work, and I'm wondering about where you go when you're writing about these really on so many levels dark, because there's not one that I read, not from your first to your last, that's ever been anything but very complex and nuanced.
Yeah, they're dark stories, but I have no kind of interface with that darkness the way real cops do. I mean, I'm sitting in the ivory tower or whatever you want to call it and writing about it. And, so I'm kind of stealing from the people who tell me what it's like to really do that. But also, I can write about that stuff, and but at the center of all these stories is somebody who's empathic, undaunted, and mission-oriented, and those are really noble things. That's what we all want to be. No matter what we do in our life, we want to be that way. So so I'm dealing with a hero, my kind of hero, as I write these stories. So I'm not haunted at night when I'm done a day of writing about something dark, because there's a beam of light in the middle of it.
He is both a loner and very beloved by some people. People love him. He's made connections with people. He had a rough early life, and he is a loner, but beloved. He operates as a loner, but his partners end up usually revering him, even though he's cut him out of a lot of the action. He's an interesting duality to me.
Yeah, but you also got to understand, when I write the first Harry Bosch book, all I was hoping for was I'd get that published. And I had no idea the guy would be lasting. Now it's like 32 years. And
The people like me would be like trying to read
but
all kinds of stuff into it.
he's fascinating to me because of the things you're talking about. And I just had no idea that this would happen and would last that long. So it turns out he's had a terribly torturous life, because I can't make him happy, because then people might not like him, But
Mickey Haller is maybe your. He's very happy.
Yeah, he has a more happy life, although he's had multiple wives and so forth. But yeah, with Harry, he's always got to be longing for something, and I think that's part of what connects him to readers. And I feel bad about that, because it has been a long stretch for him. He has his daughter who's the light of his life, and I think he finds ultimate fulfillment in her, and in his work, and doing what he does. But I've had this discussion with editors and so forth. Could Harry be happy in this book or whatever? So I've always said to her, like, if you're reading one of my Harry Bosch books and he opens the front door and says, "Honey, I'm home," then that's the last book. So it is, he's a victim of my success, I guess, that he has to be the loner guy that you're mentioning, that you're describing.
And so then there's the curmudgeonly part about him. What's the word? Anti-technology.
He's a Luddite.
Yeah, a little Luddite,
Right,
and
yeah. Say it. But he's also smart, and so you're right. Grudgingly, he understands. He came to a point to say, "Hey, this DNA stuff is really good, isn't it?" So yeah, he's just like he's never an early adapter, but he adapts. Yeah.
How do you birth the new characters? Renee, Mickey, Maddie. I mean, his daughter is becoming a character, right, in the last book, in the latest one.
Well, I'm in the same genre, so I really kind of put a emphasis on making sure they seem different. They're going to be a lot the same. I think Renee and Harry are the same, but they have a little bit different approach to the world and worldview. So they're not like dramatically different, but I don't want to do a new character unless people will be able to tell the difference.
I haven't read every single book, but in all of them that I have read, there's a huge component of graft and ignoble behavior by cops, bad cops. What kind of pushback do you get about that, or what kind of feedback do you get from cops, police about that part of the portrayal?
I think all cops understand not everyone's a Harry Bosch. I mean, there are bad cops. That's the way it is. You know, there's 10,000 cops in LA. Is there 10,000 good cops? No way. You take any segment of society, you're going to have a percentage of people that have ulterior motives for doing what they do. My job is not to worry about whether cops think I have too many bad cops. Or, my job is to put obstacles in front of Harry Bosch or Renee Ballard and even Mickey Haller, and we see how they work around that, or how they dismiss people that they can't trust and things like that. So, I think it's reality-based fiction, and so I don't get pushback. I mean, I think deep down, first of all, I don't think a lot of cops read cop novels because they don't feel like anyone gets it right. So it's a very small percentage of my readership, and I get a lot of support from them. I can't tell you how many emails I get from cops all over the country, actually all over the world, offering their help because they see that I'm trying to get it right, and that I'm getting close to getting it right. I don't think any cop would ever say I'm 100% accurate about everything. It's a subjective world. We've made a TV show for 10 years about Harry Bosch, and we have amazing access to real LAPD stuff, and that comes because commanders in that department like what I'm doing, and what part of what I'm doing is showing bad cops, so they understand. And I kind of say that's proof that I'm getting close to getting the world right when the chief of police says, yeah, you can shoot in our labs. So like if you watch a show and they go to a lab, it's the real lab, we shoot in the real Hollywood station, and we've had this amazing access. And so only one time, so we've done 10 seasons of Bosch, and there's always this moment when we're starting to film again. Commanders come in and out, so I always go in to see the captain in charge of Hollywood division, and kind of a dog and pony, thanks, and we're going to start filming again soon. And there was one guy in the 10 years, I probably had to do this with 4 different captains, and one guy chided me on the bad cops I've been showing in my books. so 1 out of 4, it's not bad. Yeah.
Over that time. You made a reference earlier when we were talking privately that you're not, this isn't normal for you to be out speaking in public. We were talking about that, but you said you spend 10 months a year, pretty much alone writing, but you're also producing these TV shows. What's that? How does that push and pull you?
It looks like more involvement than it really is. I mean, I'm a book writer, and that's what I gotta always be concentrating on. But I'm also an early morning person, and luckily Hollywood doesn't get going until like 11 o'clock in the morning. So I've been able to keep my pace of writing at least 1 book a year, through all this. And it's mostly because I'm writing by 6 a.m. and a good day for me is like writing for 4 or 5 hours, and so in the afternoons I can go and sit in a writing room for a TV show or go to a set. But it's really about how you set up those shows and who you get. So early on, like I was involved in choosing writers and producers and stuff. And you're just looking for people who don't want to take your books and say, oh, I could do this better. They want to adapt the books. That's what Amazon or Netflix or whoever got the books for. So you'd think that's a no-brainer, but there are a lot of people. I mean, I have a big ego. I'm a writer. There's ego is big in Hollywood, and there's many people think they could just take the character and go in a new direction. And I've had that happen with other projects, and they usually founder and don't go anywhere. So my Hollywood education is over 30 years now, And, you know, and I've seen scripts, movie scripts written about my books that have no bearing on what they're about, you know, that kind of thing. I wrote a book, a pretty serious book called Concrete Blonde about a serial killer, and the script was a comedy. Because at the time, Beverly Hills Cops was a big hit, so they made Harry Bosch a joking guy. So, you know, and luckily it never got made. So it's about finding the right people, and if you trust the people, you can go home and write your books, and that's pretty much what I do. So it looks like I'm Mr. Producer in Hollywood. You know, my name's on it as executive producer, but that's because I'm the originator of the stories or the character. So I get that credit, but I'm not there all the time.
It's fun to watch it and try to figure out, I mean, they're not absolute carbons of your books. They're adapting the books.
Right.
And it's fun to kind of see different angles from different books pop in.
Yeah, I mean, my books are very main characters centered. You see the world through Harry Bosch's eyes. The Lincoln lawyers are mostly in first person. So there's not a lot of room for other characters, but you can't do that in television. You can't make Titus Welliver be in every scene, you know, because the days are 16-hour days and you'd kill the guy. So they bring in, you got to expand the storytelling, and you got to give other characters bigger roles than they have in my books. And that's, you know, one of the fun things about doing this and seeing it happen is, you know, when characters are either very small in the books or are only mentioned once or twice in the series, take on, you know, big roles. Like Crate and Barrel are only in one book, but they're a big part of the show.
That's right.
Honey Chandler is in one book and gets killed, and she lasted 10 seasons in the Bosch show. So apologies for the spoiler. And I love that, you know, because it is a character that comes from the book, and you know, these writers who I'm just talking about, how much I trust them, take it in great ways, and guess who gets all the glory? Me. Everyone thinks I'm the creator of Crate and Barrel, but they were humorless internal affairs detectives in my book, and they're the kind of like the comedic relief in the show. And I have no responsibility for that, but I get the glory for doing it. So.
I want to get to the questions, and I will. But one more question. Does producing the television shows, does that ever have kind of effect on you as a writer, and what, did it ever give you any ideas? Did it ever affect?
Yeah, I mean, it's expanded my storytelling. So these shows, the advent of these shows in the last 10 years. And so if you look at the books I've written during that, I've also expanded. So I've had multiple points of view and things like that. So my books are less single narrating type books. And I think that's because of the show. The maturation of Bosch's daughter, Maddie Bosch, is ahead of me on the shows. You know, she was a cop on the shows before she was a cop in my books. And, you know, and I've told the writers, yeah, eventually she's going to be a cop and she'll take the baton from Harry. But they ran with it ahead of me. So I'm catching up to the show that way. So it is interesting how that plays back and forth.
Got some questions from the audience now. One is from Chad Grisby. He writes, I love your books and I'm reading them all for a second time. Do you have an author who is similar to you that you would recommend while we wait for the next release? You actually did a litany of them in I don't know what I'm reading right now. I think I'm reading your first book right now.
In this book. Yeah, that's a good one. I forget where it is in the book, but at one point Ballard and Bosch go into a storage room, you know, rent a storage, you store it or whatever, and start going through boxes, and they find the person who had a book collection. So I was able to name like about 10 authors.
Yeah, but it didn't include Chandler.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're lost, I think you said, or something.
Yeah.
Or not
But
you,
one of them
Harry.
mentioned James Lee Burke. I'm sure people have read him. I think he's the master that's currently writing.
I'm sorry.
James Lee Burke.
Okay.
And I love his books. It's now that I write these, it's hard for me to escape into crime fiction because I see the writer back there and what they're doing. So I read. I mean, at a time in my life, I was a voracious reader of crime fiction, and that's why I do it. But now I read less and less of it. So I read more nonfiction than crime fiction. But I always read James Lee Burke because I just think he's an amazing writer.
Marla Ridenour asks, what prompted you to give up journalism to write novels? And was there a defining moment or person in your life that inspired the switch? So now we've talked about all of that mostly, but I'm wondering, you said you waited maybe longer than you had to because you were worried about losing that contact.
Yeah, I wrote 3 books, my first 3 published books. I mean, I wrote 2 books that never were published, that they were part of my learning process. And it was the 3rd book I wrote, which became the first Harry Bosch novel. But I published 3, and I had this thing going on in my head with, could I be a better writer if I didn't have to go to the newspaper every day and write multiple stories a day, and then come home sometimes pretty tired and go into my writing room. So I asked for a leave of absence, and they gave me 6 months. And so my 4th book was called The Last Coyote, and I pretty much wrote it during those 6 months. And I thought it was, a writer's always their worst, most harsh critic is yourself. And my take on it was that my prose or my skills or whatever had made a major leap forward when I was completely focused on the book. So the writing was on the wall, and I knew I had to quit my day job, my cop job, crime beat. I had to quit that in order to be the best novelist I could be, and it was not an easy decision because I had that access. I just didn't see the future that my access would actually get better. So I went back and did 6 more months, and I gave them 6 months notice. They had said, we'll give you 6 months off, but don't you dare come the last week and say, I'm not coming back. You know, you have to come back so we can integrate some, and if you want to quit, fine, but give us time to integrate someone to take your place. And
Those were the good old days.
yeah, the newspaper was pretty fat and happy.
Yeah.
But it was funny, like about a month after I trained somebody new and I quit, the O.J. Simpson case happened, and I'm like Mr. Full-Time Novelist in my room, and my wife comes in and goes, you got to come out and watch this. And so we watched on TV.
Going down the expressway that way?
Yeah, and we lived in the hills, and so we could actually see like about 10 helicopters moving across the horizon out our windows, but we were watching it on TV, and when he finally got to his home and was arrested, gave himself up, there was a gigantic knot of reporters outside the gates of his driveway, and I saw the guy I trained in the middle of that knot, and I knew I had made the right choice. Yeah.
Do you have connections with, reporters in the field? I mean, it's different now, as we've said a couple times, but they're not the same skill level, maybe. Maybe at the bigger papers they are.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk for hours about what's happened to the newspaper business and media in general. And it's just not the same, and something's lost, maybe something's gained. It's hard for me to see what's gained when you have a weakened center for a community of news and discussion and debate. It's really tough. Yeah.
Ginny Halloran asks, she says, you transitioned from a very successful reporter journalist to one of the country's top novelists. Can you talk a bit about how your approach to these two forms of writing differs and how you became so accomplished as a novelist in terms of character development, dialogue, plot structures, pacing, etc.? You mentioned that you were a voracious reader yourself of crime fiction, but did you go to Iowa Workshop or anything, or do anything like that to?
No, I mean, when my father said go back and get a journalism degree, I did, but I double majored. I also got a creative writing degree, and it was mostly novelists who were teachers, and so I learned a lot from them. Her main question was like, how are these different? And I think they're more alike than different. I mean, obviously, when I was a newspaper reporter, there wasn't online versions, and now I guess you can write and write and write. But when I was at the paper, you were always writing for a hole, as they call it. They had X amount of inches, and you had to keep your story within that. And so you really learned to hone your words, and like nothing is expendable. If you put a piece of dialogue in a news story, it better carry more new information, not underline what's already been reported, because you don't have enough space. You never have enough space to tell the story you want to do. And then I flipped, and now I can write as long as I want. I write 100,000 word novels, but I still, it's still, I still have a journalistic sense about how I write. Short sentences. I think short sentences create momentum. It's like a staccato approach to writing. I know Hemingway did that, and he's a former journalist. And, so former journalists who have success in the worlds of novels usually carry with them their what they learned as journalists in terms of writing. And that to me is one of the key things of writing is momentum. Like if you have momentum when you're writing, what happens in the writing process is going to happen in the reading process. So if you're feeling like you're slugging it out and it's tough sledding when you're writing, guess what? The reader's going to feel the same way. So to me, the journalistic approach of short sentences, short descriptions, create momentum in your day as a writer, and they're going to create momentum when someone's reading it.
And then there's always that killing babies thing.
Yeah, you always, I go through about 3 drafts. My first drafts are always about 110 or 112,000 words, and I like to turn the book in 98,000 or 100. So I cut as I go through and hopefully improve my books. It's all about cutting and keeping momentum.
From Tony Rich asks, he says, one of my favorite books was Void Moon, probably because it focused on the criminal, Cassie Black, rather than the detective. Have you stayed away from writing about criminals because of the popularity of Bosch and Haller, or do you find it more difficult to write from the criminal perspective?
Like I like criminal books. It says more about the questioner than me, I think. No, I mean, I am really interested in these people who have what I call the noble pursuit, people who have to make these difficult choices and put themselves out there and sometimes in danger to do their jobs. And so that the criminal part doesn't work for me in that way. And, there's a whole vogue in crime novels of understanding why serial killers became serial killers and all that stuff. I rather understand why a detective would do that, why they would do this job. When the danger of being a detective is not bullets. I mean, that is a danger, but it's more about internal darkness and how that can metastasize and really hurt you. And that to me is really interesting. Why someone kills someone or why someone steals something, not so much interesting to me. And it takes me about 10 or 11 months to write a book, so I really have to be engaged, and so I think it would be hard for me to be engaged for a lengthy period writing about a criminal. Now,
Yeah, what was it about Cassie Black then?
well, Cassie Black it was about the most important decision she makes in her life, and it'll be a long time to get into it, but basically she is pondering whether she should steal a daughter who she gave up as a baby. And so that book's, yeah, she's a thief, she's a criminal, but that's not what the book's about. The book is about this decision. So she watches her daughter in the home she's in now and is deciding whether to take her. And that's what that book's about.
Rick asks, with Bosch aging with the books and inevitably going to leave us, have you ever thought of going back to Bosch's first days on the force and writing about that? So the early Bosch.
Yeah, I mean, it's the journalist in me. I really like writing about contemporary society. And so I thought about that all the time. And you know, Bosch ages in real time. I've said he was born in 1950. So luckily there's a vogue in law enforcement where police departments with, you know, very difficult budget issues, I've gone back to retired detectives and asked them to volunteer their time to solve cold cases. And one of my good friends and top consultants on Harry Bosch is 72 years old, and he's still solving murders as a volunteer to the cold case squad, like Ballard runs in the books. So as long as people like that are doing it, I think Harry can still function believably. But as soon as it's not believable, I do have to end the series in some way, and then maybe I will go back. I have, to use a journalist phrase, I've been gathering string for years about the 70s in Los Angeles and Patty Hearst and all that kind of stuff. So I think there is a novel there, and maybe I'll get to it, but we'll just have to see about that.
What about LA? Because that's so much a character in the book too. I love where you tell, first he goes down this street, then he turned that street, then he's gonna go this way and that way. And I don't know why, but it's really interesting to read about a city I don't know a lot about.
I just think it's, that is one of the cool things about novels, that a lot of it is about, you know, your character navigating life. Yeah, he's a homicide detective or on some kind of case, but he's also trying to navigate this very complex city, you know, and we're all doing that no matter where we live. So I think that is again like a empathic strike zone between me and the reader, and it reveals character too, how someone operates in their city. You know, Harry's a rare bird. He was actually born in Los Angeles. Not many people there were. You know, they come from somewhere else. I like to say my daughter's the only one I know who's born in LA. You know, and so I think that's all part of it's important stuff. It's not filler. What street he takes and how he gets somewhere, how he avoids freeways in LA, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. You know, you might be able to do some kind of compendium of that and like sell it as, for the travelers, the tourists. You've used this word a couple times referencing Harry, empathic. And one of my questions I had written down in my chicken scratch was, is he psychic? I mean, I think I was watching the show the other night, and his partner said, how did you just go into that room and come out of there and make that flip? How did you make that leap? You use the word empathic. Is that kind of what you mean? He could just sort of start to see things take shape?
Well, I mean, it's a lot about it. I think they're two different things. I mean, his experience allows him to jump forward, I think. Like it's almost like he's seen it all before, so he knows how this is going to play out. But in my life of watching detectives, I feel the best ones have some kind of empathic quality, that allows them to connect with people, either to get them to talk, whether they're a witness or they're a suspect, to be able to integrate into, pierce all veils of society. It takes some empathic skills to do that. And that has fascinated me. Yeah, and with real detectives that I know, and it comes out in conversations I have where I say what you just said, like, wait a minute, you're telling me about a case, how did you make that jump? And it was like, I just knew, I just knew this is what could have happened here, and that kind of thing. And so I think it's an important quality that I've seen in real detectives, and I try to give it to Harry.
Let's see, this is Thomas Hahn. It says, I love Titus Welliver as Bosch in the television series. Can you tell us how he was chosen and how he compares to the Bosch you had imagined when writing your books? And he also wonders, I guess, kind of like what I asked a little earlier, what new dimensions has he brought to the character for you?
It's funny. I didn't have any kind of like contractual say on who I forget the legal term, but I had a say, but they didn't have to listen to me.
Yeah.
So when we had this meeting, a big meeting with all the stakeholders in the show, producers, studio people, with these two casting directors to talk about who would be Harry Bosch. And just coincidentally, like about a week before, I had seen a TV show where Titus Welliver was the guest star, and he played a veteran with PTSD. And he didn't say, "Hey, I got PTSD." He projected it, and we knew the Harry Bosch books are very internal. You know what he's thinking, and none of that stuff can end up in a show. You know, you never know. You can't put in a script what someone's thinking. It's only about how they project, what they say, and the actions they take. And so it was a very difficult thing to try to cast this guy who's very internal in the books. So I knew we had to find someone who could, just through his eyes, say, I got a lot of stuff going on here. And so I go to this meeting, and there's a 5-page list of actors, and his name wasn't on it. And I was ready to go in there and say, Titus Welliver. And I'm like the guy, I'm a book writer, I'm not a Hollywood guy, and all these people are all experienced in making shows and movies and all that stuff. So I was very intimidated, and we kind of went through the list, and half of them were like pie in the sky. These people are movie stars, and well, Matt Damon's not going to be Harry Bosch, that kind of stuff. So the list got down to maybe 20 names, and no Titus Welliver. So I carefully asked the question, what do we think about Titus Welliver? So in case it was a bad answer, it wouldn't be like it was only me who suggested it. And the casting directors go, we love him, but he's making a movie in Hong Kong, and we had a very precise 6-week window to cast this. And they said, we checked on him, and he won't be back, so he's off the list. He's not on the list. And, you know, that was too bad. And then we went through 5 weeks of auditions and couldn't find the guy. And it was like a Thursday, and on Monday was our deadline. And so we had a meeting saying, we're probably going to have to ask for an extension. And that could actually kill a project, because everything is scheduled and money is flowing. And if you say, put on the brakes, they might be permanently put on. So it was a terrible decision. And we talked to the casting directors again. Sorry, this is a long answer. But it makes me look good, so I'm going to say it.
You say Titus, I want to know the Titus Welliver story.
So they said, you know what, we just heard from Titus's reps that he has to come back this weekend to see his kids, or he'll lose his custody agreement, because he's gone like 2 months without seeing his kids because of the movie he's on. And so we were sympathetic to that, but they said, can we talk to him for an hour? So he came in on a Saturday. He came in on so he had never read my books or anything, but he flew back from Hong Kong and read they asked me, he's going to read one book, what should it be? And I said, The Last Coyote. So he read that, and he came in, and we had a audition, like a 3-page from the pilot script that we were using for the auditions, and he came in and did that with an actress we had already cast as the lieutenant, and he nailed it, and then we thanked him, and he left, and there was like about 10 people there, and I didn't say anything, but I knew he was Harry Bosch, and then somebody else said, I think that was Harry Bosch, and then someone else said, I do too, and then I said, I think it was too, and then somebody yelled, go get him. Before he flies back to Hong Kong. You know? So somebody ran out and got him, they brought him back in, and he got the job, and that was on the Saturday, and on Monday was our deadline.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
and he's been fantastic, and you know, he's recognizable as a character actor. He never had a lead, and that was a Hollywood lesson I learned. You give somebody who's chased roles for almost 30 years, you give them their first lead, and they will do whatever you want, and he's been the leader of the show for 10 years, and he's just absolutely fantastic.
Well, I love the casting on all the show. I mean, the whole show is cast so beautifully. Everybody's, it's not all glamour unless it is a glamour girl. It's not, it's just very down to earth and easy to relate to, and we're out of time, so I have to stop talking and say thank you to Michael Connelly.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you.